Hello everyone and welcome to the School of Taste. Nick Jackson back with you again, this time for our final session in this webinar course, Understanding Quality in Wine. If you are watching live, thank you for being with me today. Please do use the questions function for any comments or questions during the course of the webinar. As usual, I will be soliciting your opinions, so please be prepared to type away using the questions function. And if you are watching on recording, thank you very much for taking the time to do that, and of course for working your way to the end of this webinar course. So last week we looked at one particular aspect of winemaking which will have an effect on the quality of the wine, and arguably it is the most significant one that will affect wine quality, which is aging. We examined aspects of wine quality associated with aging prior to the release of the wine onto the market. Although I think a lot of the things that we said could also be applicable to aging a wine after it's been released, aging the wine in bottle. This week, I want to expand our discussion about winemaking decisions to include some more variables, perhaps not quite so dramatic as the effects that age can have, but nonetheless very important for affecting the style and quality of the wines. I think one of the things that perhaps has been most important in the previous two sessions especially is our emphasis on what I call these style categories. Things like a simple everyday wine or a powerful age-worthy wine that will improve with time. These big kind of catch-all statements. That's what I'm calling the style categories. Now, if you remember, the way that we sort of arrived at those style categories was by doing an assessment of what I call the raw quality of the wine, i.e. by looking at things like concentration and balance and length, and then using those to kind of inform our decision about the style category. The style category being, what is this wine trying to be? What's its identity or purpose? But I think the other really interesting thing that came out of that discussion was that sometimes it seems to work in reverse as well. It's the style categories that can inform our interpretation of the raw quality of the wine. To give you one example, we looked at, for instance, Langhe Nebbiolo versus Barolo. And in that case, while the Langhe Nebbiolo may not have a kind of raw quality of the same level as Barolo, nonetheless, when you factor in the different style category, the different purpose that that wine is trying to fill, what its identity is, then it gives you a much greater understanding of the quality of the wine. It's a sort of interpretive matrix for understanding the quality assessment that we do when we look at things like balance, concentration, length. So I think this aspect of the style categories is super important for understanding quality. And it's on those categories that I want to spend a bit more time today. I want to draw out a few more implications of those categories, a few more considerations for us to think about that will inform our understanding of quality in wines made in slightly different ways. So this slide, I think, is reasonably obvious to all you wine experts. Winemakers can make very different style wines from grapes that come from the same place, sometimes harvested at the same time, depending on choices they make in the winery. I don't want to linger on this slide because I want to get you guys tasting, but just have in the back of your mind this question at the bottom of this slide. Why would you choose to make a wine that may not be as qualitatively good as another one that you're making? Just have that question in the back of your mind. I'm not going to answer it now. I'm not asking you to answer it now. but just think about that in the back of your mind during today's session. So the first thing I want to do is I want to taste the 2 German wines together, if you have them, Trocken and Kabinett. What I want to do is to get in place our quality assessments and our style categories for those 2 wines, and then we will develop from there. We'll build the session from there. So please pour those 2 wines now if you have them, and then we will return to this familiar slide to you by now. And so your task, what I'm asking you to do now, if you will, is to choose a style category for both of those German wines. And it could be the same category, that would be fine. And to justify your selection of the style category with reference to the quality aspects over here. I know we've done this before, but we just need to put these in place so we can make sense of what we're going to do next during this session. When you've had a chance to taste the wines, please tell me using the questions function what categories you would choose for both of those wines, and what of these points has been most influential in taking you to that category. So while you're doing that, just a little reminder on my part, these ones, I think you probably all know, you understand what they're all about. The aromatic expression, again, just a reminder, that's not just whether the wine has aromas or not, although let's hope it does, but how pleasant and alluring they are. How much after you smell the wine do you want to keep on tasting it? Ripeness, remember in the Burgundy session, we talked about the way that ripeness is what permits all the other quality categories. It's very difficult for a wine to be complex and interesting if it's not ripe in the first place. Ripeness also messes up the balance of the wine if it's not there. If a wine is underripe, maybe you get hard tannins. If it's overripe, maybe you get high alcohol. So the balance gets all messed up. The concentration and the depth of fruit I distinguish from the intensity of flavor. The concentration is simply how powerful the fruit is as opposed to watery. Is it pure concentrated fruit, or is it a bit watery, a bit dilute? Whereas the intensity of flavor is an experience where you just feel like the inside of your mouth is being coated with flavor, and on the finish as well. You'll be pleased to hear, have an experience where those two were quite far apart the other day when I was tasting a wine. I will not tell you at this moment what that wine was, but basically it was an off-vintage European white wine, which didn't really have much concentration of fruit at all. But nonetheless, because it came from a great terroir, it had massive intensity of flavor. There was a very weird disjuncture between the two things. But that's a good example from a less than great vintage of the way that intensity of flavor can get out of whack with concentration of fruit. It's not a very common syndrome, but it can happen, so just look out for it. And especially when I think about that, I'm reminded of the last session when I was talking in passing, a little bit in passing, about sometimes in weaker vintages in marginal climates in Europe, you can get times when the aromas of a wine can be fantastic, but the concentration can be lacking. Those kind of faults are very possible. Length, not just how long it is, but also the quality of that finish, how pleasant the finish is, how attractive it is, and the way perhaps that it knits together all the different elements of the wine, the flavors, but also perhaps the tannins and the acidity in a nice balance, whether there's any kind of retronasal perfume or aroma that emerges, things like that. So the quality of the finish is important. Now, as I've said before, these bottom 5 ones in the left, you only have to worry about if you're in the presence of what seems to be a pretty good wine. Honestly, most of the wines in the world are not made to where these categories are relevant. Most supermarket wines, it will not really be necessary or even appropriate to consider those categories. But the very best wines, maybe the top 10% of wines, those categories might be relevant. Are they age-worthy? Is it typical of either the variety or the region? Talking about variety, the transcending the variety thing, if anyone missed my session about this, transcending the variety means the story which is being told by the wine is one that far exceeds just the story of the variety. So we all enjoy, you know, Pinot Noir, fantastic, beautiful, wonderful. But you can get Grand Cru Burgundy, which is telling you a story about many different things, about where the wine comes from and climate and place and all sorts of things. Or you can get sort of entry-level wine from some region that's not so famous for Pinot Noir, and it can simply taste like fruity Pinot Noir. Perhaps it's got the texture or the aromas or the tannins that you recognize it is what it is, but it's not transcending its variety, it just is its variety. Whereas Burgundy might be considered by some people at least to transcend its variety in good examples. Precision, detail, subtlety, these are comments on how precise and intricate the flavors are, how much you can distinguish one from another. Again, I think in wine it's considered a virtue if you can delineate all the different flavors rather than everything just being a big kind of homogeneous mass of fruit or flavor. When the flavors are really precise, then that's generally, I think, considered to be a good thing. My controversial category of beauty, with which some people disagree, they don't think it should be in there. They don't think it's analytical enough. But beauty would be that thing where you just can't help yourself. There's no other word for it. The wine is simply beautiful. But that's quite unusual. And that would probably have to be certainly at the very minimum a category C, more likely a category D wine, using the categories on the right, excuse me, here. Okay, so what do you guys think about your wines? First up is Neil. Thank you, Neil. So a dry wine from the Mosel, a category C. It's rich and complex with a slightly oily texture. Pronounced minerality, stone fruit, lime, blossoms. So those are all notes of complexity of flavor to me, with a long finish, deep and age-worthy. Good, that's a very nice note, thank you. Meanwhile, the Kabinett is only a category B, lovely but lighter bodied, not as deep or complex, a medium plus finish. Not age-worthy, it's too light and delicate, a slight spritz. So Neil is drawing a contrast between perhaps the more concentrated, I'm putting words in Neil's mouth here, but more concentrated, perhaps structured wine, which seems to have a good potential for aging, as opposed to the rather light Kabinett, which seems to lack depth of fruit and complexity of flavor, and therefore may be unlikely to improve with age. I think those justifications are great, Neil. I think they make a really strong connection between what I call the raw quality assessment on this side to having a style category over here. I think that's very good. I suppose some people reading that might say, well, could it be that the wine with some residual sugar in it could be more age-worthy because the sugar acts as a kind of preservative, and we know that sometimes that even very light Mosel wines can last almost forever. But when I read your note, I also think about the fact that you're saying perhaps it lacks the concentration and or depth of fruit and complexity to improve. And so in that situation, while ingredients like sugar may act as a kind of preservative, which may enable the wine to last a bit longer, if the wine is not going to develop greater complexity simply because it doesn't have it in it, then really what would be the point in aging it? It's not going to improve with age. So yeah, that would be a good justification. So thank you for that. Edgar, Peter Lauer, Grosses Gewächs, This is a wine from the Saar. Great concentration of fruit and balance that is maintained throughout the long finish. So that's a category C wine. The Trocken wine, the dry wine for Edgar, is category C because of concentration and a long finish. Meanwhile, the Dernhoff, which I assume is a off-dry wine, Edgar, is a category B wine. The fruit dominates but has typical Riesling qualities. So some marks there for typicity, but perhaps lacking a bit of complexity. So good. So category C for the dry wine. Actually, so both Neil and Edgar put the dry wine in category C and the off-dry wine in category B. Annie, welcome. So Annie has got a Trocken in category B, ripe fruit, though lean, cool climate expression, high acidity, though bitterness on the mid palate, simple fruit with a moderate length, but refreshing and charming. By contrast, the Kabinett is category C, which is very concentrated, ripe fruit, mouth-filling. Its intensity stays the same throughout the finish. Sweetness is very integrated, not separate at all. Same with the high acidity, very well tied together. Some complexity of ripe peach, candied pear, and ginger spice fruit. You know, one thing I'm just reminded of when I read this note is that when the words come easy, when your descriptions come easy, generally it's a statement about the quality of the wine, right? Because when there's a lot to say, usually that means it's interesting. When you're really having to search around for your words, your descriptors, then often it can mean that there's not that much to say, which might be a statement about a lack of quality in the wine. But certainly Annie finds it easy to talk about the Kabinett. So for Annie, a Kabinett is C and the Trocken is B. All for good reasons drawn from the quality list. Thank you, Annie. Maria, welcome, saying Trocken is a D. Wow, that's very good. So top quality Trocken for Maria, saying potent, concentrated, complex, balanced, intense, age-worthy, with typicity and precision. So even reaching into these bottom categories over here for a category D Trocken wine for Maria, excellent. But the Kabinett is only a B, which is intense, balanced, age-worthy, but less precise, less complex, concentrated, less transcendent, and long. Good, so a big drop off in all the categories there from the Trocken to the Kabinett. Very good. Erica, Riesling Trocken is from the Rheinhessen. Tart, citrusy, green apple with some flinty, dried straw and waxy notes. I'd call it a B. There is aromatic expression that has some complexity, but it lacks some ripeness, the concentration of fruit and the intensity. That reminds me, reading that, Erica, that this, my mention here of ripeness as a quality factor, it may seem a bit of a weird one compared to all the other ones in there, but when it comes to German wine so far north, that some of you, it seems like Erica does find this, that there can be a struggle for the ripeness perhaps in the Trocken wines, meaning they could be a bit tart, a bit edgy, and that can be a fault. So just a B for the dry wine for Erica. Alice, Trocken is more aromatic with riper fruits, but finishes a little bit short. The Kabinett is light and floral, but lingers well with candied fruit characters and not just sugar, both enjoyable, both category B. And what I really love about that description is the way that Alice is thinking about all elements of the wine. With these lovely German wines, classic European wines, coming from great terroirs. Sometimes we just put our nose and we're like, oh, this is so good. I just want to drink it, enjoy it, whatever. But you've got to listen to the wine all the way through. And Alice making the point that the Trocken wine is great up front, but perhaps a little severe or short on the finish. Always a risk with these high acid German wines just to finish on acidity, like we talked about in the context of non-vintage champagne. But good notes for both category B for Alice. And Nupa agreeing, same category. Lars, Lars has eliminated all the variables by having a Trocken and a Kabinett from the same producer, same vintage from the SAR. The Trocken is a B as its moderate build and aromatic expression, complexity and intensity. It does have varietal and some regional typicity, but does not go beyond it. A good wine. The Kabinett, meanwhile, is between a B and a C. It does show more aromatic complexity and length, carried by the residual sugar. Yeah, that's a great point by Lars, that sometimes residual sugar in a wine can contribute to sustaining a longer finish. It can seem to carry the flavors. Great point, Lars, thank you. The Kabinett is more inviting, more typical of the region with a pungent slaty minerality and shows more interest. So good notes from Lars, good justification for the answers there. Amiel, Trocken, from the Mosel, and then a Rheingau Kabinett. In the Kabinett, juicy citrus and stone fruit and dry stones. There's a typicity in both, but a lack of precision in Trocken, and less concentrated only citrus fruit and slate in the Trocken. So less precision and less concentration of fruit in the Trocken. Definitely age-worthy for the Kabinett, meanwhile, very balanced and complex finish in the Kabinett. So a B for the Trocken and a C for the Kabinett. So at present, I mean, most people, with the exception of one dry wine, which was a D, most people seem to be in the B and C categories, but not with any unanimity. Some people are going B for the Kabinett, some people are going B for the Trocken, and C vice versa. So some agreement, some disagreement, but generally we're in the same ballpark here. Nupa, the Trocken is lean and taut and lacking some fruit, while the Kabinett is fuller and riper, but I feel the fruit is overtaking some of the other elements. Certainly can be an issue in a vintage like 2018 for a Kabinett or off-dry style. The fruit can dominate a little bit. And so that goes to the balance point. Might be a little out of balance if the fruit is dominating. Erica, the Kabinett has aromatic fruit aromas with more citrus and minerally notes on the palate. The residual sugar brings balance to the high acidity. Good, great point. The concentration, ripeness, intensity, and length are all a notch up from the Trocken I had. I would put this as a C. So Erica's going to come down on the side of the Kabinett. So again, I think about a 50-50 split. Okay, so great answers, great justifications. I think you guys have got this down. You're drawing great conclusions in terms of style category from these quality aspects. So that's excellent work. Now let's just advance this a little bit and see whether we can just add some other elements to this. So we have just discussed what the quality and style category of the wine is, or these two wines. What I want now is to consider what the competitors might be in the marketplace for wines of these two very different styles. So to go back to last week, you might remember that I wanted to compare wines of a similar style category. And so some people said that, for instance, the vintage champagne was of the same style category as the Brunello, in the sense they were both concentrated and age-worthy serious wines. And so we did that comparison. And, you know, there could be some situation in a commercial wine buyer's life when that might be a relevant thing to do. But more likely is that you're going to compare wines which do exist in that same style category, but have got greater commonality of just style than those two wines did. So again, I'm calling the style category what you just did, A, B, C, D. And a bit confusingly, I should have chosen different language, but style being like a dry red wine or an off-dry white wine. So the question here is, outside of, you know, in the case of, let's take one wine, let's take the Trocken, start with the Trocken. If the quality and style of the wine is, you know, good, it's a category B or a category C. But what are the competitors to a Trocken wine? If you're a wine buyer or a customer and you're considering buying a Trocken German Riesling, what other wines could fit the bill in terms of a similar style and a similar quality? What do you think? What might be competition in terms of the same quality and a similar style? A few hints below, things that you might want to think about. But what do you think? What do you think is a competitor for Trocken? Because this is really where, this is the kind of the sharp end of our quality assessments. This is where all quality assessments lead to, which is having to make decisions about which wines you want to support or you want to buy or recommend other people to buy. We can do quality assessments all day long, but they're a little bit academic until you get to this point. So what do you guys think? What are your competitors, or your rivals if you're a buyer of these kind of wines? Annie is arguing that high acid Sauvignon Blanc from a cool climate with green and floral notes. Okay, that's good stuff. So certainly picking up on the cool climate style of the wine. Perhaps Sauvignon Blanc a bit more aromatic than Riesling, but certainly the same ballpark. Michelle, meanwhile, is going to go with the same variety, but from a different place, from Australia with Eden Valley. So again, very dry style, Trocken style, quite a big acid structure. Certainly quite a firm, fresh kind of style. And likewise, Yvonne is also going to stick in the same variety, but go to a different country in Austria. So Riesling from Austria. Similar style, very dry wines from Austria. Perhaps a bit more savory than German wines, a bit more on those savory characteristics rather than the kind of the bright fruit that you get in German examples, but certainly a similar style. Amiel also wants to say Austria, but this time changing variety to Gruner. I guess I would also think about alcohol levels there. Certainly if you get a Wachau Schmaragd or something at 13.5%, it's in a different world from a Mosel Trocken at barely 12%. But on the other hand, in cheaper examples or examples from cooler regions, then you can certainly get to lower alcohol levels. So that's a good shout. Maria also supporting the Wachau Riesling. Amiel pointing out Chenin Blanc from the Loire would be a good competitor. Clearly high acid, semi-aromatic variety with great aging potential. I think that could be a good call. Neil also likes Loire, Savonnière maybe, high acid, aromatic, a dry version of a wine that's often sweet. And Neil saying you could anticipate Vouvray as a competitor for Kabinett. Yep, I love that. That's a great argument, Neil. Edgar, for the Trocken, you could even go with something like Assyrtiko. So dry, structured, high acid wine. Sure, just slightly different climate, perhaps a bit more concentration, just overall power. Nupa with some great suggestions. Chablis, sure, why not? A wine built on minerality and acid. Chacolí, sure, from Spain. Gruner, again, unoaked, taut, high acid, mineral driven whites. All good, I love this. Alice, Alsace Riesling, also possibly Risch-Weiches Albarino for acidity and fruit character. Yeah, I can see that, sure, why not? And Nupa also going with Albarino and Yvonne as well. And Maria, yeah. Lars saying an interesting competitor stylistically for Trocken could be Atlantic climate Albarino again. Fresh acidity, salinity, sometimes fruit profile, yet does not suffer the sweetness stigma of Riesling. Yeah, absolutely. So these are great suggestions. So let me sum it up briefly. There are variations on Riesling, right? Riesling from a whole bunch of different countries. Then various salty white wines like Chenin Blanc, Assyrtiko, Albarino, which emphasize not just acidity, but also some kind of salinity or perhaps minerality. Chablis, perhaps also you can put in that category. Someone mentioned unoaked, generally unoaked style. But you can see that for Riesling Trocken, there is a ton of possible competitors. I think everything that you've said makes perfect sense. So how are we going to narrow this down a little bit further? This is step one. Let's take a look at what step two might be in this kind of commercial process. So why, for the purpose of this discussion, let's take two other wines. We'll do the Riesling Trocken, we'll do Albarino, since there seems to be quite a lot of support for Albarino. And we'll do a Riesling from Australia. So three wines: Riesling Trocken from Germany, Australian Riesling from Eden Valley, and Albarino. Those are the three I want you to think about. And so here the questions are, how does this wine, meaning the Riesling Trocken, how does the Riesling Trocken compete with Albarino and with Australian Riesling in terms of who will buy this wine? Let's break these questions down. So first up, who will buy this wine? Which means what kind of person, what kind of wine consumer is likely to buy these wines? So let's start from Riesling Trocken, do Riesling Trocken first. What kind of person is likely to buy Riesling Trocken? Is it a mum with two kids in tow at the supermarket after school? Is it a wine geek in a very specialist wine store, perhaps close to the region of origin? Is it someone at a cool wine bar who's drinking it by the glass? What kind of person will drink Riesling Trocken from Germany? And if you want to, you can also consider at the same time, whether this is the kind of wine that person is going to buy more likely in retail, or more likely in a restaurant, at a cellar door, in a wine bar, in any kind of sort of on-premise situation where the wine is opened for them. We can take those two questions together. I'm just trying to develop a profile of who you would sell the Riesling Trocken to and in what kind of situation. Michelle making a point, there's a lot of consumption locally in Germany for Trocken. Yvonne thinks connoisseurs would buy it. Nupa says hipster soms, good. Or urban hipster soms, excuse me, so from big cities. Annie is saying, a somewhat educated wine lover who knows that it will be dry and what character as an aperitif at a wine bar or to match with simple hors d'oeuvre. Okay, good. Nupa, Germans are the largest consumer of Trocken wines from Germany. Yep, I believe that. Maria saying engaged consumers at independent stores. Sarah, local German market, drinker in a SOM-led restaurant, or a wine enthusiastic in a high-end supermarket or an independent retailer. Katja, predominantly in Germany, a consumer more into wine cellar door on premise, not a supermarket wine. Amiel, a wine bar consumer. Alice, a high involvement consumer, possibly more likely in the on-trade. Edgar, more of a wine knowledgeable person, a higher end restaurant. Gianluca, a wine bar by the glass by a consumer with a medium to high knowledge. Well, I mean, I think we're being pretty consistent in these notes. There's it seems to me, two large parties in which we're falling into. The local consumption in the country of origin, fine. Everyone likes the wines from their own country. That's, if you can't sell wine to the people who live in your own country, then you might have difficulty selling wine, period. There's always a bias towards home country products. The rest of it, though, everyone's saying is more about more knowledgeable consumers, perhaps buying in smaller locations, less about supermarkets, more either independent retailers, higher end restaurants, or wine bars. Okay, so that is quite a broad category of consumers requiring some degree of knowledge. But why don't we do that same comparison and compare with, say, Albarino? Let's do that exact same question. Who is buying Albarino and in what kind of place would they buy Albarino? Would it be a very similar consumer profile or very different, similar locations? Shengli saying for the Riesling, probably a specialty wine bar. Yeah, I agree. Again, emphasis in Riesling, certainly dry Riesling. We might talk about the off-dry Rieslings in just a sec, but maybe the dry Rieslings. Amiel saying Albarino would be high-end retail, So perhaps also similar place, like kind of independent retailers, boutique retailers, that kind of thing. Maybe higher end supermarkets, specialist supermarkets, perhaps. Maria reporting that Albarino is drunk everywhere in Spain. So, I mean, 2 points I take from that. Yes, on the one hand, you've got the local bias that I was just talking about, which is expected. And the second thing is that the way that Maria says everywhere, it makes it sound as if everyone is drinking Albarino everywhere. So a big swath of consumers. Neil saying, arguing similar for Albarino, specialty retail, restaurants, wine bars. Shengli arguing Albarino could be more of a supermarket wine, a casual dinner. Sarah, broader reach for Albarino in the US, by the glass in mid-tier restaurants and bars, supermarkets and independents depending on the level. Sarah making the point that Albarino is everywhere. Annie, somewhat similar profile, especially in a Spanish tapas scenario for on-premise. You sure? Sounds good. I wish I was in a Spanish tapas bar right now. Alice, variety of wine shops both locally and in mature markets, possibly premium supermarket owned label on and off. Nupa Albarino has become more mass market in Toronto and is sold more widely. So echoing what Sarah was saying about the US market. Gianluca in Spain, specialty retailers and tapas style fish restaurant, both by the glass and by the bottle. Michelle making the point Albarino is very big in the UK. Lars, Albarino has definitely gone up in price in export markets, giving it a more savvy profile, while locally there's more generic versions. Readers of wine media and subscribers to Case Wine Services likely as is often written up by journalists, says Alice. Yeah. So I think the broad takeaway is that while Albarino may not be, you know, Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc, it possibly has broader appeal than Riesling Trocken from Germany. And certainly it does seem to be more commonly witnessed now in many countries around the world, not just in its local country where, as Maria says, it's very popular. So let's just sum this up a little bit so far, so we can keep our eyes on the prize here. Riesling Trocken has got a market and a strong market, especially among either local consumers, but internationally among more savvy, more expert level or more serious wine consumers, and perhaps in more serious wine focused places, either in the on-trade or in more specialist retail. But Albarino is much broader. Now, here's the issue. If you're making a Riesling Trocken, if you're a Riesling Trocken winemaker, that you love those savvy consumers, but the risk is that the Albarino is taking a big bite out of your market. The wine is available more broadly, perhaps more in a normal supermarket, perhaps more commonly in restaurants. Someone said it's written up a lot more often, perhaps more visibility. So Riesling Trocken certainly has got a market, and a good market, but a market with a big competitor in the form of Albarino in it. And of course, we're not even mentioning all the other wines. I mentioned the Australian Riesling, all the other competitors that you named. We're not even mentioning those, but just choose one. You've got this big beer moth that's called Albarino, possibly interfering with your market. So let me ask the same question, but of a Riesling Kabinett. What are the competitors for a Riesling Kabinett from Germany? 35, 40, 45 grams a liter, about $25 maybe of course more for the famous domains. What other wines have got a similar profile and similar quality level to a decent Riesling Kabinett from Germany? There was tons and tons of options for Trocken. Let's see whether we get any for Kabinett. Michelle is saying Vouvray, as someone mentioned earlier. Yep, absolutely, combination of high acid and off dry. Annie making the point that off dry US Riesling, yes, Off-dry US Riesling, yes, but I would say that that's quite a small segment, and I don't think very much exported. Maybe Saint Michel a little bit, but I wouldn't say that's a huge segment. Some Pinot Gris from Alsace, yes. Slightly different profile, I would guess, being something more full-bodied, more alcohol, and probably less sweet. But yeah, I know what you mean. Vouvray, says Yvonne, yes. New Zealand Riesling, again, yes, but a very small category. Sarah also thinking of Vouvray. Maria saying Marlborough off-dry Riesling. Yeah, sure, but just not an easy wine to find. Nupa saying Ontario Riesling. It's a secret. I know it's a good secret. Extra dry bubbly. Okay, I think we've reached the bottom of the well here. Look, you can see the point I'm about to make. Riesling Trocken has got a great market of dedicated consumers that all you guys pointed out, but it's also got a number of competitors, a number of very serious competitors. The way that we had to work quite hard just now to identify competitors to another style, to Riesling Kabinett, tells us, in fact, that it is quite an unusual style of wine. So Vouvray is the one that's coming up most often, but that is a wine with 5% more alcohol. I mean, that's quite a big difference, really quite a different style of wine. A very featherweight Kabinett compared to a medium-bodied off-dry Vouvray. Yes, I understand, of course, about acidity and sugar, but still a different style. So in the competition for Riesling Kabinett, I believe that there may be fewer competitors than there is for Trocken. So that would certainly be an advantage for that style. But let me ask this final question, the second bullet point on this slide, with reference to Riesling Kabinett. Forget about Trocken for now, but look at the very last question here. What limitations or difficulties are there to selling this wine? What do you think with reference to Riesling Kabinett? Limitations or difficulties to selling Riesling Kabinett? I mean, if it hasn't got very many competitors, why not just go to town with Riesling Kabinett? There must be some impediment. What are the limitations or difficulties with the style? Yvonne saying the labeling, it's in German. Yeah. Michelle saying it's sweet. Yeah, it's sweet. Annie saying some consumers hate sweet styles. Maria saying it's both sweet and it's Riesling. Yeah. Erica, Kabinett is not always sweet or dry, so it's hard to know what you're going to get. Yvonne, consumers don't know if the wines are sweet or dry. Nupa, people don't understand the balance between off-dry and the acidity. Sure. Amiel saying the sugar level. Neil saying the sweetness might be off-putting. Food matching is challenging and it's not understood. The sweetness and the price for Sarah. Shengli, ambiguity about the sweetness and the high acid. So Annie, lower alcohol may be a factor as well. Yep, great point. Some people buy wine for alcohol. It's got an alcohol content. It'd be naive to deny that, sure. Lars, low alcohol pairing possibilities with international cuisine could be a positive for a modern wine consumer. Yeah, maybe one of the more knowledgeable ones that we were just referencing. But I think you're beginning to see now what I'm getting at. So when we're talking about whether the Kabinett or the Trocken is a B or a C, we are then situating it within a context where we can compare it to different wines of a similar style or style category. And there may be more consumers for a style, but if there are more consumers, then there's more competition as well. If there's fewer consumers, if there's fewer competitors in the style, there may also be fewer consumers because the consumers find something about the style off-putting. So just interesting to weigh up in the balance. We can purr all day about how much we might love one of those styles over the other style, but both have got advantages and disadvantages that have to be weighed when you're a winemaker, when you're making that decision, which style do I want to make? Okay, now we do have 2 more wines to do. We are being a bit self-indulgent with our time today. So please pour your red wines if you have them. The 2 Italian wines, Valpolicella Ripasso. Interesting to do this tasting, the kind of thing I haven't done for a long time, but cool to get the opportunity to look at those wines, which I personally don't taste very often, so it's fun to do that. Now, with these red wines, I do want to do something very similar to what we've just done, but I think we can sort of accelerate it a little bit. So I guess the first thing to do would be to just try and situate the 2 red wines within their own style categories. I know that you can justify your style categories from, you know, the quality, the list of quality factors. So you don't need to go into too much detail, but just taste the wines, take just a few minutes to taste the 2 wines if you have them both together, and tell me which category you would put each in. And then we'll go forward and talk a little bit about what the competitors for each might be and how you might understand the difference in style category and difference in quality. I mean, generally speaking, we haven't spent too much time in these sessions talking about price because it's for a number of reasons on my part, because I think talking about price can muddy the picture. There is often a connection between price and quality, but not always. And so I don't want to put the idea in people's heads that we can determine or guesstimate quality on the basis of price. I think we should have more confidence in our own tasting abilities to use these quality factors to come up with a correct style category to situate the wine then in a broader context. But having said that, Valpolicella Ripasso almost always is more expensive than Valpolicella. It simply is. So if you're a Valpolicella winemaker, why wouldn't you just turn over as much of your production as you could to the more expensive product? There could be increasing costs, of course. You know, any winemaking which is more elaborate is more expensive, but simply putting it over the skins of the wine used, of the grape skins used for Amarone is not surely that expensive. It's not like champagne where you've got to leave the vintage wine on the lees for freaking 6 years or 8 years or 10 years. Now that's the kind of thing that drives your accountant crazy. But you can still get your Valpolicella Ripasso out by 1 year after the harvest if you want to. Okay, while you're tasting those, let me just read your final comments about the Rieslings. Shengli mentioning the Riesling has got a bad reputation among the uninformed older generation. Well, I mean, I think the older generation, you know, people like my parents in their 60s, you know, in the 1980s, there was a lot of branded wines like Black Tower and those ones, Liebfraumilch and things like that, which didn't do much for the reputation of German wines in general. Just a combination of a little bit of alcohol and quite a lot of sweetness, sure. Amiel saying, will always be a niche wine Riesling. The acidity from that far north is not accessible to every consumer, sure. But to wine geeks like us, who are that niche that you're talking about, we really love it, huh? And we're going to be the ones spending our hard-earned money on it. So if you can fill that niche successfully and offer good value, which Riesling usually is for people like us, then you can still make sales. It's not an impossible sale. Oh, Michelle making an interesting comment that for her it was difficult to find a Valpolicella that's not a Ripasso. I'd be interested. Did anyone else find that? I found it was okay to find both. They were sitting there on the shelf together. Okay, Maria saying that the Valpolicella is B category, light, fresh, and red fruited. The Ripasso is between a B and a C, more structured. But I'd rather drink the Valpolicella. Any reason why, Maria? Is there anything off-putting about the Ripasso, or you just prefer the light, fresh fruit of the regular Valpolicella? Let me taste mine since I've got them right here. Yeah, there's more than a hint of Amarone, isn't there, about the Ripasso, which I guess should not be surprising. But Maria just saying that the Valpolicella has got more appealing aromatics, whereas the Ripasso needs food. Okay, that's quite a big difference in style of wine, isn't it? I certainly think that many expressions of Valpolicella, at the very kind of simple level, can be among the easiest going Italian red wines, not too much tannin, just fresh and easy drinking. Amiel Valpolicella with really juicy fruit, pleasant, but not more than that. Category B. And the Ripasso has got more alcohol, structure, raise in the acidity, perhaps volatile acidity, Amiel, certainly more complex. And that's more of a C category wine. Gianluca saying B for Valpolicella, simple, unpretentious, but with a good finish. The Ripasso is more dense and has got some additional herbal complexity. Medium finish, good, and that's category C. The Classico is a B, whereas the Ripasso is A for Nupa. So going backwards in reverse here. Unfortunately, in Ontario, where Nupa is, there are a lot of insipid Ripassos at the monopoly stores. The Valpolicella is at least fresh and balanced, while the Ripasso, the high alcohol, is out of balance with dried, almost jammy fruit and VA. And really thank you very much, Nupa, for that honest note, because it does remind me, of course, that is a very important point to make in one of these quality discussions, is that sometimes wines that ostensibly should be better by what they say on the label can be overworked. They can be overmade by the winemaker, trying to sort of add value by additional winemaking. I'm thinking here about extra extraction, use of oak where it's not appropriate or the oak doesn't integrate, elevated alcohol, which then sticks out, ripeness, which becomes over-ripeness. All of these things, which on paper should be good things, end up just not being successful. These are always the concerns. I mean, for instance, I actually prefer in Tuscany or Barolo, I actually prefer the Normale wines rather than the Reserva wines, because I find the Reservas can be so tannic and so dry. Whereas I like the freshness and the vibrancy of the sort of apparently lower level wines. And sometimes I think that the higher level wines can get out of balance. So always be aware of that. That's always a risk as well. Edgar, the Valpolicella has so little tannins that it's very unstructured. The Ripasso has more structure, probably from the increased aging in oak. Sure. But I mean, spending the time passing over the grape skins again is going to add a bit of tannin as well, tannin structure. Annie is enthusiastic about Valpolicella, which is a C. Complex fruits, mouth-filling, great balanced acidity over a long finish, medium body, but great concentration of fruit, and it cries out for food. The Ripasso is also a C, but could be a D. A very prickly structure, a bit of a teenager, disjointed, needs time to integrate, but perfumed, dense, deep cherries with a long finish and shows lots of potential. So very good quality Ripasso there. For Neil, the Superiore is category B. Very nice, fresh, tart red fruit. Not for aging, but pleasant now. Ripasso is B+, deeper, more bitter, more tannic, needs time. Finish is a bit tannin heavy, but the fruit is there and it should come around. So good perspective looking into the future of the wine from Neil. Michelle, the Valpolicella is a B, fresh, bright red fruit, but lacking concentration and intensity of fruit, whereas the Ripasso is between B and C, more complex with both dry and fresh fruit. More concentration, a longer finish, but the alcohol is not well integrated. Always an issue, I think, with this wine style. The alcohol goes up quite a bit between Valpolicella and Valpolicella Ripasso, so then you have to have enough fruit in the Ripasso to integrate that alcohol. So it can get out of balance quite easily. Lars, the Valpolicella is more straightforward and linear, fresher in fruit profile and higher in acidity, category B. The Ripasso is showing more palate weight and complexity from the dried fruit component, but the freshness is sacrificed at the expense of winemaking style. Right, so the winemaking is winning out again, and not in a good way. So that's another B. So both are B for Lars. The quality is similar. Sarah, Neil is commenting about the location of the tannins in the Corvina variety. I think it's tough because I don't really get too much tannin at all in the regular Valpolicella, as someone already mentioned. And I think the place to look for them will certainly be in the Ripasso. And in that case, as with so many Italian wines, I certainly get them on the gums. Neil, does everyone else get tannins on the gums in the Ripasso? In the best case scenario in Ripasso, those tannins are very fruity. So even though they're powerful and felt on the gums, especially at the front, they're still very fruity and ripe. Worst case scenario, they're quite extracted and can be harsh or bitter. Sarah, Valpolicella is an A, but the Ripasso is a B+, more concentrated, spicy, higher tannin. Anil saying on the teeth and the front gums. Yeah, I agree. For Alice, the Valpolicella is an A, simple, juicy, little tannin for structure, a rather unpleasant finish, but the Ripasso is a B, considerably more structure, robust tannins, balance the fruit and the sugar. Okay, good. Okay, so let's take one of those two. Which one shall we do? Why don't we just do the regular Valpolicella? What are the competitors for regular Valpolicella? Why don't you just chuck some names out? I would think that you might want to think about other Italian wines, but not just those either. I can think of many other possibilities. If it helps you to think about wines that you might confuse Valpolicella with in a blind tasting, then that might also be instructive, because that would at least situate the wines in the same kind of style, that they're fruity and mid-weight, fresh, that kind of thing, not much tannin. What do you think for a regular normale Valpolicella? What is going to compete with it in the marketplace? Yvonne saying Chianti, Edgar saying Barbera, Annie saying Barbera as well, but also possibly Pinot Noir. Neil saying Chianti regular or Rioja Crianza. I like that. That's a good one. Maria Beaujolais, Katia, Barbera, Chianti, Montepulciano. Erica Beaujolais, good. Yeah. Gianluca Barbera, Dolcetto above all. Dolcetto, I like that. Good. Dolcetto also for Sarah, Beaujolais for Alice, Barbera for Lars, service styles of Pinot Noir and Crianza Rioja for Gianluca, Shengli, Barbera, Schiava, Beaujolais Village, Catherine, Dolcetto. Yeah, I think Dolcetto is a good one, isn't it? Because of the slightly sweet tasting fruit. Maybe the fruit is a bit of a darker character, maybe more towards black or even blue fruit in Dolcetto. I find regular Valpolicella to be very red fruited. Barbera, for the same reason, I wonder whether that can sometimes be a bit more black fruited. But I think Sangiovese, Chianti, not Brunello, but something like a regular entry level, inexpensive Chianti or a Rioja Crianza, possibly Beaujolais. Yeah, things like that. Sure, no problem. Yep. So we are, I think, back in the territory of having many competitors, right? I mean, just think about, I mean, that was very easy for you guys. You just reeled all those out without even thinking about it. So why don't we instead think about the Ripasso? Where might we go for competitors for the Ripasso style of wine? Again, not just the style category, but the style, the literal style of the wine being relatively full-bodied, with the effect of those grape skins, again, higher alcohol, even, dare I say it, a slight perception of sweetness, almost like a baby Amarone, you know, with that slight sweetness of the fruit, more powerful structure, more intense everything, of course, than the Valpolicella. What else might the Ripasso be compared to? The Zinfandel for Yvonne. Yes, I can see that. A jamminess of fruit, quite a lot of tannins, but also still some acidity. Primitivo, yeah, similar kind of thing. Possibly Australian Shiraz or Malbec, Neil Nupa saying. So powerful, big, structured New World wines, which is interesting in a way, isn't it? When we're talking about New World, we're talking about Zinfandel, Malbec, Shiraz. So these are big wines that kind of come naturally in those hot climates, right? Full-bodied, powerful wines with high alcohol. Whereas here, we've had to go through a special winemaking process in order to boost the alcohol and the body and the concentration to that level. So in the final taste profile, they may resemble each other, but in fact, the way they got there is pretty different. Eric is saying, yeah, Zinfandel because of the red fruit, but also a little jammy fruit, sure. Annie's saying Langay Neb, though it's not as sweet. Zinfandel maybe Petit Syrah, yeah, so back into this New World territory. Gianluca agreeing with Washington State Cabernet. Primitivo again, maybe some Australian Shiraz. High extraction Barossa Shiraz. Yeah, I can see all of those. The sweetness aspect of the wine, which here, of course, derives from the winemaking, the special winemaking that this wine undergoes, in those locations in the New World derives naturally from the climate. So it's quite interesting. But the one thing I would point out, though, about all of those comparisons to the New World wines is that the Ripasso smells certainly sweet. But what I would argue is that there is some element of European dryness or earthiness, meatiness, gaminess, you know, that you get in even more exaggerated form in Amarone. There's a little bit of it here. I think it's the bitterness as well. So I feel like this is still a savory wine on the finish, maybe as a result of those slightly bitter tannins and the extraction. Whereas I wonder whether those New World wines are more sweet all the way through. Not sweet as in cloying, but the profile of the sweet is a bit brighter, more succulent. Lars saying the real problem in my market, which is Sweden, is that our other Veneto wines impersonating the style, ripe fruit and sweetness, as well as impersonating the name of Ripasso. Really, I didn't know that, Lars. There's wines called Ripassitivo. I didn't know that. So Grenache, but Grenache, again, Gianluca's making my point really well with Grenache, because Grenache is sweet, sweet, sweet. Grenache is sweet, sweet, sweet in Europe. And when you take it to Australia or somewhere else, it's even more so. Whereas I think here that there's a leathery, chestnutty, earthy, savory undertow to Ripasso in spite of that, the sweetness derived from the winemaking. Michelle saying, yeah, savory dried herbs. Amiel saying, would you say Cahors? Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing might be closer, actually. Something like one of those big country wines from south of France, like Cahors, Madeira, those kind of things, because of the big tannic element. But the point is, I think in a very similar way to the Kabinett, that we can come up with things which resemble this style. I mean, of course, the most obvious one is Amarone. But we feel like we're reaching a bit more, whereas the Valpolicella is perhaps more obvious. You can substitute a variety of Italian red wines for it, and even outside Italy, Beaujolais. No one said Côte du Rhône, but something like that. A simple Côte du Rhône based on Grenache could work as well. So limitations there, I don't really perceive when it comes to the regular Valpolicella that there are so many limitations to selling the wine other than the competition, right? Just in the same way as we had with the Riesling Trocken. There's a big market for high acid, bright, fruity wines like Riesling Trocken, but there's a lot of competitors. In the same way, Valpolicella Regular Normale, it's a bright, fresh red wine without too much tannin. There's millions of those in the world. There's a huge market for that style, but that means it's a competitive market. Ripasso is the equivalent of the Kabinett, which is to say the competitors aren't so obvious, but also it's a certain palate that really likes the combination of savory and sweet and bitterness and somewhat elevated alcohol, and the slight lack of freshness in the wine as a whole. The market for that style is not that huge. So my takeaways when I think about it like this, remember I asked that very simple question at the beginning. We can say, for the sake of argument, you know, the Ripasso is on paper a better wine according to our quality categories, according to our style categories. It's got greater depth, perhaps it's got more complexity, it's got a longer length, all those things, than a regular Valpolicella Classico. We can say, if we want to go down that route, that Kabinett, because it's longer aging, it's got this wonderful balance between acid and sugar, it's got beautiful aromatics that only improve with age, is a superior wine to Trocken, which may be fruity and pleasant at the beginning of its life, but it hasn't really got anywhere to go apart from in the very best examples. You know, I'm not really making that argument, but if you did want to make that argument, you could find ways to justify it by using your quality factors. But the point is, in both cases, there are reasons beyond purely quality ones to make the wine. You have to put it in a slightly commercial context. If you're in the middle Mosel, in those dark valleys which don't get much sunlight, you don't really have a choice. You've got to make your Kabinetts and your Spätlesers because you're not going to get enough alcohol to make Trocken styles. But if you're more or less anywhere else in Germany, you can make Trocken and Kabinett Spätleser if you want to. And why might you want to? Because you've got different markets for each product. And hopefully, if you make both styles, you're meeting two different markets and increasing the percentage of the wine consumers out there. You can appeal to geeks like us with your Kabinett or perhaps with your Ripasso. And then you can appeal to the broader consumer with, you know, the Trocken or with the Normale. So there are limitations, difficulties to selling all styles, but the more obscure, the more unusual styles like Kabinett or Ripasso, there are more limitations. Even if you can get a higher price from a smaller market, from a more dedicated group of consumers. Anyone have any more thoughts about that? About the commercial context for the considerations about why you might make these different styles. It's just quite interesting, I think, to put these apparently quality questions in a more commercial context, because I think going back a slide or two, we started the beginning of this series with this very almost dry, what I call abstract quality assessment, which we can all do and which we should all get expert in, and I think you guys have done that very well. But then I think the big step up was to get to here, to be able to go from here to talk about style. But then when you get into a style conversation, then that inevitably, I think you have to start considering the commercial factors that are going to be attendant on each style. Neil is arguing that you could say the Ripasso is more of a mass market wine as the rich style is more obvious. Yeah. To consumers who are used to that style, certainly Neil and I are in the US market where Amarone is a hugely popular style in certain states, particularly in the northeast of the country with a big Italian restaurant business, a big Italian diaspora. Amarone, however, is not a very popular style in many other countries around the world. Great proportion of Amarone production does get exported to the US, you know, so it is also about knowing the foibles and the strengths and weaknesses of particular markets. Annie making the comment that it's an opportunity to trade up, perhaps. You capture with a broad appeal, and then you can introduce the geekier wines. Sure. So someone says, "Oh, I enjoy my $16 Valpolicella Normale. What's the next step up? Oh, here's for $25. Here is Ripasso." Absolutely. It's very the subject of trading up in the wine industry is a very controversial one. I've seen people almost come to blows about it. The people who are opposed to it, they're not opposed to it, but they just don't think it happens, and they think we're being naive when we say things like people just trade up. The people opposed to it would say people have got a price cap that they want to spend, and it's $15. They'll never spend more than $15, however much they like the $15 wine. Whereas other people say that's too pessimistic, and you have to get people in the door some way if you're ever going to sell them the good stuff. Okay, so let us just make a few final comments. So all the way through, we've done quality assessments between different pairs of wines, and I think you guys have become expert about doing that. But you know, right from the beginning, I think we've recognized that sometimes doing a raw quality assessment is not the most sensible thing to do. The logical application of quality assessments would be to think perhaps more in the context of wine style. What is the wine trying to be? How do we come up with a realistic way of assessing the quality of it? And then we've tried to take that a step further today by when we've identified the style of the wine, the style category. What is the wine trying to be? What's its purpose? That then enables us to consider what the competitors might be. And we could have spent a longer time talking about the competition between, say, Sangiovese and Valpolicella, and gone into the whys and wherefores of why a consumer would buy one rather than the other. But thinking about the competition is always very relevant in an assessment of these wine styles. The pursuit of quality should, and I believe for most winemakers, is an essential part of their job. But so is the pursuit of style. You know, in mass market wines, we know that there are people who are employed, they sit in labs and they do taste tests, and they take the different tasting kits out to the consumer and say, what taste do you like? And the consumer says this. They bring it back to the lab and they say to the winemaker, you need to make a wine in this style with this profile. So that is a question where the style is perhaps more important than those quality factors. But for our purposes, when we're thinking about these quality assessments, we're really going to be, I think, applying them to higher quality wines than that. So thinking both about the raw quality and the ultimate style of the wine is important. So high quality is desirable, but the reality is you've also got to sell it. If you're a German Riesling winemaker, you might be waking up this morning feeling a little tired, but happy because for the first time in 5 years, you made ice wine like they did last night, unusually cold in Germany. Last night, they were able to make ice wine in various regions. But what are you going to do? You know, you can sell your ice wine for $100 for half bottle. Does that mean that you're going to leave all your crop on the vine on the off chance that you get a good year and you can make so much ice wine that you're overflowing with it? I think not, because again, this is a wine style market. Even if you did do that, even if it was the best ice wine ever made, what's the market for that product? It's very small at the prices you want to charge for it. So you've got to be able to sell what you're making. So a lot of questions I think we've raised in this course of webinars. The raw assessment of quality is a fantastically important thing to be able to do accurately and consistently. It will be your justification for putting a wine in a certain style category, but then try and think broadly about what the implications of that style category are, and what are the relevant questions to ask about the different categories of wine, what are the competitors, etc. Okay, so that will be that for this series of webinars. I will be in touch about more webinars in the near future. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your kind attendance, and in particular for your great comments, those of you who were able to attend live. Certainly makes my life a lot easier, really great comments. you guys do my work for me, and I learn as much as from you as you do from me. So I really appreciate it. But anyway, I look forward to seeing you all online again very soon. Stay safe, everyone, and I will see you soon. Take care.